Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 64, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
Now, I imagine we've got quite a few new listeners this week, so welcome on board if you are a newbie to the Retro Hour, based on the fact that we were number 3 in the iTunes podcast chart last week.
Which is amazing, and I would say that's down to our guest, but also our wonderful show, which was Ashen.
Yeah, we did have Stuart Ashen on the show last week, so if you did just discover us then, as there were so many new listeners, you know, IP addresses and towns and cities that we'd never seen before, do make it a regular thing every Friday. And of course, an equally warm welcome if you do check out the show every week anyway. And of course, we do try and bring you amazing guests every week. And I think this week, you're going to enjoy this guy's stories. Now, I think it's fair to say the guest we've got this week is the ultimate console modder.
Yeah, this is the modder king, and his name is Ben Heck, and he's from Element 14, if you know these guys, and they're all over YouTube. He's actually repairing the Nintendo PlayStation at the moment.
The original prototype that was discovered, of course, a couple of years ago. I think that says a lot about Ben, that the guys who've probably got the rarest console prototype in existence went to Ben to get it working.
Yeah, they're like, go mad. You know?
And he's there soldering it and all that, you know.
Yeah,
right? So.
it's crazy. But, you know, he's built amazing stuff. So he's built a portable Dreamcast. He's built a C64 laptop.
Yeah.
Even an Xbox One laptop, you know.
And he made the Virtual Boy into the Virtual Man, improved the design of that recently.
Yeah,
that was a really
totally.
Good video. And this week, I mean, Ravi, your lifelong dream may come true, because you're going to ask Ben Heck if he will consider building you an Amiga laptop.
Oh, totally. An Amiga laptop is a dream for me, and I think it's a dream for many others, because people over the years have been creating monstrosities and, you know, kind of cardboard boxes and suitcases with all this kind of stuff in. And I think Ben could do a really good job with him. So I've kind of, you know, put the pressure on, sent him a few emails, pictures like, come on, Ben, to try and get him activated and see what he can do.
Yeah, and it looks like he's quite interested, actually, doesn't it? So,
yeah, definitely.
You'll hear the moment when Ravi asks him in this week's show. So Ben Heck is our special guest. He's by far one of my favourite YouTubers. I can just, you know, his videos are quite long, but I can just sit there and, like, you know, when it finishes, I'm like, no more!
It's like solder porn, isn't it? You know, it's that kind of hardware porn. You can just look at it and go, ooh, even though you don't really know what's going on.
A lot of 3D printers as well, which is always cool.
Yeah.
So Ben Heck is going to be our very special guest on the Retro Hour in around 20 minutes from now. Now, also recently, we had a bit of a first on this show. We gave away a computer.
We gave away a computer, but in parts. You have to put it together yourself.
That's how nerdy we are. I'm just going to give you a computer. So this was the RC 2014 Build It Yourself Z80 computer. We've had so many entries on this. It's been nuts. But we have selected a winner. And the question we asked you was, what does the Z in Z80 stand for?
And the answer was Zilog.
Of course it was Zilog. Now, we've used our random number generator and selected at random to win this from all the correct entries. Congratulations, Rob Pickersgill.
Oh, congratulations, Rob. And, you know, we would love to see a picture of it working in whatever state it is after you put it together.
Get your soldering iron warmed up and check your inbox for an email. We'll get your details and get that in the post to you very soon. And, of course, we'll have more giveaways on future shows. You know, we always like to give a little back, don't we?
Yeah, totally.
Because we appreciate, you know, you giving us something as well. Now, every week on the show, we do the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. And making the list this week are people that have made really generous donations to the show. The people who help us continue bringing you the show every week and help pay for our server costs, studio time, all that kind of thing. And this week, thank you so much for your donations, Ian Guthrie,
Walter Hermans,
Jeffrey Hancock,
and Colin Walker,
who all made generous donations to the podcast this week. Thank you so much for that, guys. And if you'd like to do the same, it'll take you 5 seconds. If you want to put just a couple of quid, a couple of dollars, a couple of euros in the tip jar, all you got to do is head to our website, theretrohour.com. And there is another way you could support the show as well.
Yeah, you could just go to theretrohour.com/vote and type in the Retro Hour, and that will enter us for the British Podcast Awards, which are coming up soon. We've got to go to London, and we've got to wear suits and
got to get drunk.
Oh God, yeah, the effort.
But I mean, actually, you know, we're recording this show on Wednesday at the moment. It comes out on Friday, so by the time the show's released, we'll know if we've been nominated for one of the categories.
That's cool.
And also, there is another category as well, which is the listener's choice. So if you do vote for us in that, you know, I think they're doing like a top 10 as well. So every vote is really appreciated in this, guys. You know, literally so easy to do. You just type our name in. That's it.
Yep.
And you'll find that at theretrohour.com/vote. And speaking of, you know, things that we've been doing online this week, We've got an Instagram account.
We're so late to the game. Seriously, we've got
How long's it been going? 10 years?
Yeah, 10 years, and we've got about 10 followers, one per year. But I've started tweeting some kind of interesting stuff. I was just thinking, when I'm playing with hardware, I might as well take a picture of it and send it out. So,
well, I'll tell you what, Ravi. While we're doing this now, okay.
We'll do a little.
Get my phone. Shoot a little selfie.
Little selfie in the studio.
Smile.
Here
Give
we
us
go.
your best smile. Raise your cup.
Woo.
About 200 pictures. I'll upload the best one. So if you do want to follow us on there, all you got to do is search for Retro Hour UK.
Yep.
That's what we're on Instagram.
That's it. Very simple. And we've got one more thing to announce, which is Oliver Twins are doing a full exhibition. These are the guys behind Dizzy. They're doing a full exhibition at the National Video Games Arcade about Dizzy with items from their home in the past, and they're kind of recreating an 80s living room or bedroom that's going to have, all the Oliver Twins items in there and when they were coding. And they're going to do International Dizzy Day to launch that. So that'll be on the 8th of April in Nottingham at the National Video Game Arcade. And I shall be down there. And pop down if you want. It should be good fun.
It's going to be next Saturday then, isn't it? So Saturday the 8th of April. I'm away, unfortunately, then. Not complaining, I'm going to Norway, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, that's going to be amazing. So, Oliver Twins, we had them on the show last year. Really interesting guys.
Yeah, and Aaron from our GDS podcast is going to pop down. So, there'll be a few people and we can have a good chat.
Don't be a bad influence on him, Ravi. He's
a
nice guy. So we'll pop that in our show notes at theretrohour.com if you want to find out more. Right, then, before we get to Ben Heck, a few very interesting stories that have been catching our attention this week, including something for my beloved Apple Watch.
Yeah, because Dan, to be honest, he got this iWatch and he hasn't been using it much. He's had it on his wrist, but it's not had that much use. But I think now there may be a new lease of life in it.
Now I can turn it into a Game Boy.
Yeah, that's cool. Come on, a Game Boy on your wrist.
Now, I do remember about a year ago, there was that, someone ported Doom to it, didn't it, when it first came out?
Yeah.
Which was pretty cool. But this is a blog. And this guy, his name is Gabriel. Very Irish name, O'Flaherty Khan. And he's gone through so many jumps and hoops to get this working. It's nuts. But what he's essentially got is a Pokemon game on the Game Boy Color running on the Apple Watch.
Is this does he have to jailbreak it? Does he have to kind of install naughty illegal apps and all of this kind of stuff?
Well, because I thought that. And, his blog is about 20 pages long.
Yeah.
And I thought originally, is there a jailbreak for the Apple Watch? I'm not really into jailbreaking anymore. I used to when I first got my iPhone back in the day, before the App Store launch and all that.
Yeah.
You mess around with Springboard and Winterboard and all that, and your phone would crash every 5 minutes. I don't bother with it these days. But I was looking into it, and it seems, because, Apple don't let you run like alien code or have emulators.
They really don't like it. They make it their job to stop you running code,
Yeah, but what he's actually done, I'm not going to go into technical details because I can't understand them. But I've been reading it. Essentially, it goes through about 5 different layers to eventually get to, something that will run via the iPhone on the Apple Watch. So he runs something on one platform that will talk to another one, that talks to another one, that talks to another
Jesus.
one. So at the moment it is, he says it is painfully slow at the moment. It's not really in a playable state. But he's done a lot. He's actually got, considering the Apple Watch is... I think it's 42 millimeters. It's really small.
It's like a proof of concept, isn't it? Because he's managed to get the buttons in there as well.
Yeah, there's no on-screen
really
D-pad.
Cool. Yeah, that's so cool.
You need dainty little fingers to play with that. But we love seeing stuff like that, hardware being used in ways that it shouldn't be is always cool.
And I guess he can optimize it in the future and, maybe more people get involved and then he'll get sued by Nintendo and it'll be taken down.
And Apple will shut it down as well. Patch the way he did it, they always do. But, for the meantime, he's got a lot of video of it working, actually, which is very cool. And we'll put that in this week's show notes, as always. Something else you'll find there as well, this has always been a dream of mine, to own an arcade cabinet at home.
Oh, yeah, that would be beautiful. And, you can kind of get these original ones and they could be a nightmare.
Yeah. To get modern stuff and they've got to saw them to bits and all that.
Yeah. And, all of these retro shows I go to, there's always arcade cab bits here and there and there's always guys looking for bits. Well, this company is doing custom arcade cabinets and they're kind of in the style of each game. So, you'd get a Pac-Man and it would be the kind of Pac-Man colours and go faster stripes down the side. But also they look quite nice. They've got an LCD screen in there, which we want CRT.
Yeah.
It's 4:3 though, so they are keeping the aspect ratio.
Yeah, they're not all widescreen and strange.
Yeah.
But it looks, I mean, like you said, I mean, they kind of do them in, the joysticks and the buttons are all like different colours. And the look, actually, quite a modern look for an arcade cabinet, I think.
Yeah, definitely. They don't look like a old arcade cabinet at all, to be honest.
Nothing that it doesn't look like you've dragged it out of the back of an arcade in Blackpool from 30 years ago.
No, it looks like your hipster's office kind of stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't look cheap. It look, they're quite glossy, aren't they, as well?
They haven't got a price on their website, have they, Dan?
Yeah, we've been looking around to try and find the prices. The fact that there is no price listed and they're kind of a trendy London design company leads me to believe they're probably quite expensive.
Yeah, and I don't know if this will be as flexible as a MAME cabinet.
I don't know what they run on, to be fair. Yeah, they don't really give you much detail, do they, on this article that we're looking at here on Curbed? I think it's more aiming at, like you said, the fashionista kind of hipster market.
That'll be it. Oh, I'll have that 4-poster bed in the arcade cabinet and walking around the shop, Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, to go my penthouse. So,
but
I mean, just from a bit of arcade porn, you could say, if you want to look at these cabinet designs, they are very cool. So we'll put those at theretrohour.com. Now, this I'm so pleased to hear. Being someone who loved Sega back in the day, and I cannot wait until Sonic Mania comes out in a couple of months' time. That new, the old new Sonic game they're bringing out. That I'm going to be playing on my Nintendo Switch. It comes out at the end of May. But there is actually a new game released for the Mega Drive, and it looks amazing.
This looks insane. Like, they're saying this is the largest Mega Drive cart ever produced.
This is 80 megabytes.
Wow.
So that is nuts. And this is a game called Paprium.
And it supports 25 levels, 5 players, co-op, the save function. But also, it looks bloody amazing. It looks like Marvel vs. Capcom with like 10 times more layers of stuff on top. It just looks like if it was released back in the day, it would have kicked Street Fighter's ass.
Well, I mean, graphically as well, I mean, it kind of reminds me quite a lot of Streets of Rage 2, but, obviously better graphics, even stuff like you pick crowbars up and all that.
Yeah.
Do you want to check the music out for it as well? I don't know if
epic.
this is in the game, this is on the trailer. Check this out.
Yes.
I just want to fight hearing that music.
Yeah, it just looks insane. I can't really say any more about this other than buy it when it comes out.
Well, this is a team called Watermelon Games, and they've actually done a few kind of indie releases on the Mega Drive over the last couple of years, but there's one called PS Solar and The Great Architects back in 2010, but they've been working on this game for 4 years now.
It's quite good because all these Mega Drive games that are coming out, I know there's stuff coming out for the Dreamcast and stuff, but a lot of it's like re-releases. All these Mega Drive games that are coming out at the moment are absolutely wicked, and they are to the level that they're like beyond retail level. I think some of them,
Absolutely.
That Tanglewood one that was getting developed at the moment, all in assembly, that looks fantastic, and this following it is just insane.
And they're putting it out on a proper cartridge, and it's got the label on, and even the box has got the Mega Drive stripe down the side and all that. It looks like like a retail game from 1993.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll probably do a Genesis version as well for the Americans.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. But it's having a new boxed Mega Drive game on cartridge in 2017. That is it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and this one looks like really good co-op fun as well.
Yeah, well, I like Streets of Rage 2. I mean, I never get bored of playing that.
No, Golden Axe, you can go forever.
So we'll keep an eye on that and let you know when we get a release date on it. Something you probably won't want to download, though.
Yeah?
Plumbers don't wear ties. You ever heard of that?
Yes, I've heard of that.
I think it was AVGN did a video about it that kind of made it quite famous, didn't he, like years ago?
It was one of these kind of sexy dating games, but on a CD-ROM, wasn't it?
It was on the 3DO, wasn't it? That was the original platform.
Yes.
Came out in 1994, and the thing about the 3DO is it actually had quite a lot of kind of adult games on there. Because, unlike Nintendo had very strict rules about what you could bring out on their platform, 3DO just wanted as many developers as possible, so there's no real, quality control.
Didn't you go through a few on your YouTube video?
Yeah.
And there's a bit where it's like, I hold on to your love clumps or something like that. It's really bad.
Yeah, I think that was the Joy of Sex book, actually. Yeah. They made an FMV version of that. There is some very weird stuff on there. Yeah. But this game, it's kind of it's not really adult.
It's an interactive romantic adventure.
Yeah.
Comedy, that's what they say.
Awful. It's like, do you remember those really naff American sitcoms like The Bold and the Beautiful?
Yeah.
It's kind of that quality of acting. I'm going to play a little bit of this now, okay? Here's a little bit of dialogue off it, 'cause it wasn't really full FMV, it was just stills, photos.
It's kind of like they got models to do all the stuff, you know.
Definitely didn't get actors. Here you go. That music.
Yeah, Ma.
What are you wearing today?
My birthday suit.
Very funny. I want you to wear that nice tie I bought for you.
The polka dot tie? Get out of here. That sucks.
What did you say?
It's seersucker. I hate seersucker.
Polka dots are not seersucker. Just wear it. It'll make a good impression.
On who? The rats? Ma, I'm a plumber. Remember?
Just do it for your mother.
Ma.
John.
This is meant to be a comedy.
It doesn't get any better than that, I'm afraid.
Did you hear the stereo separation?
Yeah, that was pretty good, actually. Wasn't it? Looking at my shoulder, is he there? But, yeah, so this came out on the 3DO, and everyone thought that was the only platform. You know, coming out one platform was probably enough for that game, to be fair. But it turns out they're also working on a PC version of the game as well, which has now been unearthed. A guy on YouTube called Psychotic Giraffe has released a video of him playing the PC version of this game that was previously thought lost.
You know how he found it? He said there was no evidence except for a few screenshots. So he's kind of like, oh, this game must have been out there in existence. So he searched through the WorldCat database, which lists as library inventories. And it showed that one library, Ball State University, had never thrown away their PC version.
So it didn't get released, but they had a copy of it at that university in their archives.
Yeah.
And he went along and asked for it.
Yeah.
Like, why on earth you go to so much effort to track down that game? I've got no idea. But he's actually put all the files up if you want to download them. They're on archive.org now.
Oh, amazing.
So I love this as well, because I mean, PC Gamer, it was one of their early online reviews. Well, actually, in the magazine, PC Gamer, July 1994, they gave it 3% on the 3DO. So the lowest score to this day they've ever given a game. Yeah, it looks pretty shocking. So if you are feeling, a little bit...
What, suicidal? And then you play on that.
A bit sadistic or something over the weekend, you can download this game. I can't imagine. I mean, there was actually someone on YouTube who's played this through, and it's about a 3-hour game.
Oh, my God.
I don't know how anyone wants to sit through that, but if you do, we'll get our show notes this week as well. Now, let's finish off this week's news with a good story. This looks really slick. You found this Varcade station.
Well, at the Grey Mac informed us, Graham Mackenzie on Twitter actually said, guys, check this out. And this looks really cool. It's like one of these kind of fighting sticks, arcade sticks with two sections. But it's a whole unit that kind of does HD games. I think it's got over 600 games on it.
Yeah, 680, the version 1.1. So this is, like you said, it looks like something you could put on your lap or a table.
Yeah, like those battle sticks, you had on arcades. So.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I've gone for the Dreamcast and like the Xbox 360. But yeah, there are it's proper arcade sticks, buttons, all in one cabinet. But there is actually a computer built inside it with HDMI out. And it's got quite a lot of RAM as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, 32 gigabytes.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of a powerful ARM processor as well and stuff. So the thing about this is it's exactly for your arcade guy. Just to plug in and go for it. There's no setting up of MAME. All these games are included, and I guess they're probably in the good resolution, and they're coming out really nicely, and the reactions would be really good. They've got to be with arcade stuff. Yeah,
arcade fans are some of the most purist you'll ever get.
Yeah, so.
And I mean, it is really good that it comes with like 680 games. I'm not sure, if they've officially come down that route or whether they just put them on and hope for the best. But the thing is, with MAME, whenever I set MAME up, one of the biggest challenges, if you don't want to go through and download each game individually, or you've got to get, if you get a ROM set, it's got to be for that exact version of MAME that you got. It's such a headache.
Yeah, I've tried downloading torrents of people's main setups before, and I've got 44 gigabyte ones and stuff, and they've all been wrecked. And it's just like, how can I go through all this stuff, Yeah,
I mean, this is one of those occasions where I think having something that's just plug and play does save a lot of headache, doesn't it?
Totally, and the titles that they've got here, totally different. You can have stuff from Neo Geo, you can have stuff from Mega Drive, you can have stuff just from the arcades, so it's like a total mix.
Yeah, I mean, Street Fighter's on there, Marvel vs. Capcom. Oh, they've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles included, one of my favourite
Fatal
arcade games.
Fury, Bubble Bobble,
We were at the, the National Video Game Arcade we talked about earlier last year when you were DJing there, weren't you, in reception? And I walked around the corner and they had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade cabinet and it was free play.
Oh,
so that's why you didn't see me for about 2 hours.
That was it. That's where you disappeared.
But it was awesome. I was playing it and this kid just came up to me. He must have been about like 10. And he just started playing on the other stick. Yeah. And I was like, suddenly got transported to be like, a kid again. I was like, wow, this is cool. Right, I'm going to beat him.
I'm going to batter him.
Come away from that strange man, dear. So, this arcade station looks incredible. So
it does. And it's a bit expensive, but it's quite a reasonable price if you're an arcade nutter.
Yeah, well, it looks really good as well. It looks well made and they've got nice artwork and stuff on it too. So maybe you've got like a birthday coming up or something,
Yeah.
presents. So thank you for checking out episode number 64 of the Retro Hour podcast. And of course, guys, if you do get a minute, we appreciate a quick vote in the British Podcast Awards. We'll update you on how we're doing next week on that. Just head to the retrohour.com/vote.
Yeah, and also check us out on Twitter, because on Twitter, we ask a lot of people to come on the podcast, and you guys can get involved. It's quite good, actually. We ask someone to come on the podcast and then about 5 of our listeners go on, and it kind of encourages them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we could do some more followers on Twitter. What, we're about 800?
Yeah, I think so.
Considering we get over like 20,000 listeners a month there, we could do with a few more on Twitter at Retro Hour UK. And of course, check us out on Facebook, search for the Retro Hour podcast, get us on all your social media networks. If you ever need the links, they're on our website as well. Right then, are you ready to get really nerdy about console modding?
Oh, totally.
Here he is, Ben Heck, this week's special guest, and we'll see you next Friday.
Ciao.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we are so excited for this week's guest. Welcome to the show, Ben Heck.
How's it going?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Now, we're going to talk in a moment about your amazing YouTube channel and these, fantastic, mind-blowing console mods that you do. But I thought it'd be quite nice to kind of get, back to roots and get your earliest memories. So what's kind of your first memory of gaming or computers, and where does it all begin for you?
Earliest computer memories. It'd probably be gaming memories. Probably very early 80s. I remember when the Atari 2600 was pretty popular. I didn't have one, but a lot of my cousins did, so I could always play their consoles. Probably the first that I can really remember was when Space Invaders. That was a really big hit game on the 2600. I think that was 1980 when that came out. Because I remember that being really big. I remember being the dumb kid who didn't have a quarter to play the arcade machine, but so you just go up and waggle the joystick.
Yeah.
So I can kind of remember that era. But I didn't really get super into gaming until years later when I had both a computer and, of course, the original Nintendo.
So did you used to go to the arcades when you were young then?
Well, I grew up in a small town, so we didn't have arcades, but that was back when a lot of businesses would have arcade machines in front. I mean, it's quite rare nowadays. So over here, you see a lot of the coin pusher, string cutter, kiddie gambling machines in front of businesses sometimes, but you very rarely see arcade games. And if you do, it's usually Golden Tee or Big Buck Hunter. But yeah, back when I was a kid, they'd have a couple of games in front of the J.C. Penney or the Ben Franklin, or later on the Walmart. Or sometimes you'd see one at the grocery store, and they stuck them everywhere, and it was weird. So basically, how that would work is your mom would give you some quarters, and you would be occupied playing the video games, and she would go shop. But nowadays, I'm sure people would be worried about their kids being kidnapped or some other kind of thing. But back then, it was the babysitter, basically.
Different world back then, wasn't it? So are there any games?
Yeah, I guess it was.
Are there any games that kind of stand out in your memory then from back then that you used to love when you were really young?
I remember playing Mario Brothers a lot on the 5200 of all things.
Wow.
That one was really fun. I like Pole Position because it had, the scaling graphics. I know they didn't do it quite the same way that Sega did with Outrun, but it looked better. Not Outrun, Turbo. That was the first Sega scaler game, from 81 or 82 or something like that. Back then, there's a lot of Atari stuff. I really like Sky Shark, the arcade game of that. That was a lot of fun. I know that was a few years later. And then, when the Nintendo came, the home consoles are basically what murdered the arcades. And so when the Nintendo came along, I started, just playing the games at home.
Were you also into pinball and stuff? I noticed you have a big pinball kind of fascination.
Yeah. That was kind of a later thing. I did find them interesting when I was younger, although back then pinballs were like 50 cents long before the arcade machines went 50 cents. So it's like, oh man, it's pretty elaborate to play this machine. I mean, now I realize the reason they cost 50 cents is because they're so expensive to build. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of something I got into later, well into adulthood. But I actually design pinball machines. I did one a couple of years ago for Spooky, and now I'm in the middle of designing another one, and I'm actually heading down to Texas in the United States for a big pinball show in like 2 days. So that should be fun. Yeah, that's been pretty fun.
So I do love, when we go to like retro events and stuff, I often go on the free-to-play pinball machines because, you can get you're not really your money's worth because you're not paying for them. But if you're playing like a bar, I only play for like 10 seconds, and I'm like, it's all my balls gone. I'm not the best.
Yeah, that's always fun when you can go to free play areas. Well, a lot of arcades do that. Like that's kind of a trend here is an arcade, you'll pay like $20 or something for a few hours, and then basically all the games are on free play. So not just shows, that's kind of it's like the new trend for what arcades do exist.
At what point did your fascination with how things work start?
Oh, I don't know, probably when I was a little kid. I mean, I would take apart all my toys, take apart my Stompers and my Transformers. And I had the Lincoln Logs and the Erector sets and all that stuff back then. So pretty much as far back as I can remember, everything I ever got as a present or as a toy as a kid, everything got taken apart. Except my first camcorder because that was far too expensive to mess with. Kind of like that. And that still happens today. We did a teardown on the Nintendo Switch, and I think there was one screw left over. And I'm like, well, that's normal. You should always have one screw left over after your teardown. As far back as I can remember. And I was born in 1975.
So did you get any electric shocks as a kid then?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it still happens today. Because I would do stupid things, which is so ridiculous to think about. But I was like, I wonder what happens if I would stick like an LED into a main socket, as you would call it. And it's like, oh, wow, magic smoke comes out of it immediately. That's fun. But nothing too awful. I mean, I'm sure I burned myself a lot, but that still happens now. And, I'm just kind of used to it. Soldering iron's only like, it's not that hot. It's not like it's going to melt your flesh off or anything. By and large, it was pretty safe. But I was really big into like computer programming. That was something I got into as well back in the 80s. And once I started getting into that, I kind of completely forgot about modding and hacking for quite a long time, like decades, actually.
So what was the first kind of gaming mod that you did when you got back into it?
Well, the first thing that I modded, I found an old Atari 2600, as I mentioned before, and I was like, wow, there's so much wasted space on the circuit board. Maybe I could hack it down and try to make a smaller version of it. And yeah, it was just one winter. I just decided to do that as a fun project. That was like, oh man, that was so long ago now. That's insane to think about. That was 17 years ago. Oh man, how time flies. Back in 2000. Yeah, and so I grabbed this Atari and I like chopped it up with a bandsaw and I kind of reverse engineered it. And I didn't know what I was doing really because I really wish I would have kept into electronics as a teenager and a young adult. But I kind of let that lapse in my life for a long time. I really regret that. But oh well, what are you going to do? Although programming has been useful as well. So I built this Atari 2600 portable mod just for fun. And then I randomly talked about it on a forum or something. And I had a little GeoCities site. That's how long ago this was. And then I started getting all this traffic and people were just amazed by it. And then I started doing more of them.
I think you could say it's probably the best way to learn hardware is just to kind of experiment with it then.
Maybe not the best way, but it certainly is a way. I mean, that still happens now. Like right now I'm working on reverse engineering that Nintendo PlayStation prototype thing.
Yeah.
We have it in our shop at the moment, and it's the same thing. You have to dig up the data sheets, you have to hook it up to the scope. Of course, that's a lot more sophisticated than what I was doing when I was 23 or however old I was back then. So it's the same kind of thing. It's discovery and just prodding around and seeing what you can find. It's kind of like digital archaeology, maybe not digital, copper archaeology. I suppose you could probably dig up a piece of copper, Yeah, it's kind of fun. It still happens. I still really like the old stuff. Like a couple of years ago, I did something I'd always wanted to do. I like hand soldered a computer from scratch because I've seen people do that, and I was like, I got to do that as like a hardcore thing. And what I did was oh yeah, you guys are probably fans. It was a ZX Spectrum or ZX Spectrum.
Oh yeah.
Because there's nothing in that thing. It's spectacularly cheaply built, and so I just got the minimum parts and I started together and actually made like a little portable version of it with a little keyboard and everything, and it was really fun because I was like, I don't know, I just thought it was fun to build a computer from scratch, just using the schematics, and almost everything in that is off the shelf.
These days, it's kind of like there's a lot of computer companies that are closing off machines and hiding how to actually use them. With stuff like the Raspberry Pi coming out, do you think it's really important for kids to learn how hardware actually works?
Yeah, I think it is. You see that there's a very high level of abstraction that people have to deal with from their code to how the machine actually works. I come across that quite often on people who are programmers. You program at such a high level nowadays that you don't really even think about how the computer works. I mean, there are programmers who don't necessarily understand what bits are, for instance. And because nowadays it's like, oh, I've got all this memory, I don't care. But in the past, you were like, oh, I've got a byte, I can store 8 status flags with that. And yeah, it's all been abstracted away. But there are concepts like with programming. You have like ands and ors, and you do XORs as well, and all sorts of things like that. And those, are analogous to the logic gates that actually control a computer as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's one thing that, yeah, you kind of separate the user from all that magic. I think that's one of the reasons why Linux, is so popular with like, computer enthusiasts, is because it's much like how things were in the 80s, where everything was a command line and you had to kind of do it from scratch. And I think people like getting at the nuts and bolts of the computer in that way. I think that's part of that appeal. Personally, I had to live through that in the 80s. That's why I'm not really into Linux, because I just don't have the patience for that. But I certainly remember those days, like, typing programs out of magazines. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if the hardware is necessarily that locked down. It's glued together. I mean, that's the worst part. But it's just, yeah, it just seems like this magic device, and you no longer really think about how it works, just what it does.
There was something very magical about, like, poking and peeking into like RAM on the Commodore 64 to see what you'd hit, and banging the metal. Yeah, and then you could very easily crash the quote unquote operating system or the 8K of ROM or whatever was bootstrapping the screen. Yeah, and then you just hit the reset button, and sometimes your RAM might still be there if you're lucky. Ha 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 ha. Into the monitor. Yeah, I mean it's weird. Like it's kind of hard to crash Windows even. Like I'm probably jinxing myself later on. Like it sounds like the good old days where you're always getting those blue screens of death. It's like everything is like so protected now, and protected memory and all sorts of safety. And yeah, of course nowadays, if computers crash as much as they did in the old days, people would be like, they wouldn't accept it. I was going to say, it's kind of crazy that we're like, almost romantically nostalgic for blue screens of death now, isn't it? Yeah, it's thinking about your first bike ride. Even though you scraped up your knees and your elbows, it's still a romantic notion that you're just running around like a kid doing things like that. Yeah, I actually have, what did I get? Oh, one of my fans sent me an Atari 800 computer, which was my first computer. And I still have my first computer, but I'm like, if I cannibalize this one, I can beef up my original one. Like this one has a nicer case, for instance. So one of these weekends, if I have some time, I'm going to recap everything and, replace all the electrolytic capacitors and just beef it up. And so I've had that thing for like 30 years this spring. It's amazing though, looking at an old piece of hardware and holding it though, the memories it can bring back. Yeah, it's like, oh man, I remember using this and it was so insane. And the weird thing is like you turn on that old equipment, you still have muscle memory of all the keystrokes and everything works. You'd think you'd forget, but you don't necessarily. You still start peeking and poking. Like, oh yeah. It's like riding a bike, I guess, isn't it, in that way? Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Although I did notice, I don't know, I was doing something in the command line in Windows and I typed LS. So I did get a little confused there. I thought I was in Linux. But yeah, I always had this idea. I thought it'd be cool. I haven't gotten around to it though. But like get like an old tube TV and like an old desk and make like a 80s computer. Like
workstation and like kind of, recreate it. I was really thrilled once. Can't remember what it was. I built something for somebody. So it was a client. And they're like, "Oh, I'm going to send you a special bonus in the mail." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And I get this box, and it's a still in box Atari 1050 disk drive for the computer, and it's so minty nib that it still has the paper fake disk inside of it for transport. Like remove this disk for transport. I'm like, "Oh, this is so awesome!" So then I immediately took that and I took all my old disks and I started copying them over because, especially like in Europe, there's so many people making peripherals for old 8-bit computers, USB peripherals, SD card readers. I mean, it's very much alive, and it's so cool that you can take that data and put it onto modern computers to archive it and also use the connections to run it off original hardware. You can download a disk image and then run it on your real machine.
Yeah, I've got a Commodore 64 that's networked to my PC, and you can just flash disk images over like an Ethernet card, and then it writes it on the 1541 drive. It's nuts.
You can load tapes on the MP3 player as well.
Yeah.
And then
I remember I used it when we were showing the ZX Spectrum. Was there's an app on Android, and you can load the tape images, and it will just play it right off your phone over a patch cable, and you can load the tape drive that way. It's pretty insane what they've got.
Yeah, if I'd have saw that when I was a kid, it'd have blown my mind.
Yeah, I was lucky. On my first computer, I had a 5 1/4 disk drive. I never actually had to deal with the tapes.
You were lucky, definitely.
If you look at the schematics, it's incredibly impressive how to a cost, so to speak, they built the ZX Spectrum. It's just so cheap. It's amazing.
Well, your first ever kind of public geek exposure was on the screensavers. How did that come about?
Oh God, that was a million years ago. That was like when I was like really skinny. How did that come? I think I'd done a few shows and conventions at that point. But yeah, that was back in like 2003 or 2004, I believe. I don't know. They just called me up and they're like, "Hey, do you want to do this thing?" And I'm like, "Sure." And they flew me out to, I think we filmed that in San Francisco. And I just brought the gizmos I had. We did it up at the show. We talked about it. And actually, that's actually is what got me my book deal. Mm-hmm. Is not necessarily the fact that I appeared on the show, but I had edited this video at home. And like, well, here's the process. And I did this quick cut video and like showed how I chopped up a motherboard and blah, blah, blah. And then they played that over the air during the segment. And then this publisher contacted me like, "Oh, we were really impressed by your very concise and to the point video within that segment. You want to think about writing a book about how to hack consoles?" And I'm like, "Sure." And that was another fun adventure in my life. So I'd been on TV and stuff multiple times, but I think the 2004 appearance, that was probably the most fruitful.
I was going to say about the writing a book about hacking video game systems. I mean, that was quite. You must imagine that's probably quite a niche subject for a publisher to call up and ask you to do. I mean, was it an interesting process to go through? It was a lot of work. I think I started it in May of 2004. Yes. And there's a lot of things you have to do. You have to do a lot of formatting. You have to use templates. You have to send in things for milestones and edit review. And I wasn't just writing a book. I was also, there's like 8 projects in the book. So I was designing, building, testing the projects and writing the book at the same time. And I did all of that. I think I wrapped it in October of that same year. So I'm not even sure how I did it that quickly. I must have worked a lot faster back then. Yeah, I don't think I would probably write a book again because honestly, if your last name isn't King or Rowling, there's not a lot of money in it. But I guess it's something I can put on my bucket list as having done.
Well, what is your favorite project and why?
Well, the one that I was really, really happy with was I did a couple Atari 800 portable computers. And the second or third iteration, I made it all beige and brown and kind of ugly like the 80s. And I was really proud of that one. That one turned out really well. The Xbox 360 laptop that I made, I know we're kind of getting far away from retro gaming here. That one caught a lot of people's eyes. I gained a lot of notoriety just from doing that. So that one, it was kind of a pain in the butt to build, but it actually, it got a lot of mileage, I should say. I've done so many projects now. I'm kind of running out of, like, oh, what should I build next? I'd like to bodge together a few more 8-bit computers. I discovered that you guys familiar with the Sega, what was it? The Sega SG-1000, the predecessor to the Master System?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that had the, what was it? Basically, the Texas Instruments, that had the same video chip as the MSX and the ColecoVision. And then it turns out you could actually, the chip inside of the Master System has the same legacy modes as the SG-1000, which means you could technically run a ColecoVision game on the Master System, well, at least with its video chip. Its video chip could support that. So then I'm wondering how far that would go because, the Master System games work on the Sega Genesis using legacy support. So I've always kind of wondered how, like, if you could get like a ColecoVision to like boot up a display screen on a Sega Genesis, something like that might be kind of fun.
Some little hidden functionality. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I would think that it would probably work because they had several layers of backwards compatibility. I mean, the Genesis chipset is just an evolution of the Master System. The Master System was an evolution of the Texas Instruments chip that was in everything. And yeah, that kind of stuff is fun to look at. And I've noticed some other things over the years, like the way the bits are clocked on the Super Nintendo in a certain way, like all of the shoulder buttons and X and Y are on the second byte of the 16-bit data packet. And I've always wondered, like, to do like some digital archaeology, like, did they want the Super Nintendo to be backwards compatible? I think they at least considered it at one point. Things like that I kind of find interesting, like, digging up the past and figuring out how those things worked, and not even necessarily how they worked, but what the thinking was behind them.
And one project I've always wanted to see is a Commodore Amiga laptop, because many have tried, and we've had briefcases, wooden monstrosities, and all these kind
Wasn't there? The Atari ST had one, right?
Yeah, it did, yeah.
I mean, like a real one from Atari.
Yeah, the Susie or something was it? Yeah. I can't remember.
The Stacy, wasn't it called?
That was it. Yeah, that might have been it.
But there was never an official Amiga portable?
No.
So no, the ST probably got it because musicians liked it a lot. Huh. Well, I don't think it would be that hard to make a portable. I mean, couldn't you just do it in FPGA, or would you want it to be a real hardware?
Oh, real hardware, yeah. I'll send you one if you want, Ben.
Yeah, that's one system I've never really dived into. I wouldn't. What kind of video output? Is it RGB with a half color brightness, or do you know?
Yeah, it's RGB. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wonder how hard that would be to do.
On, the Amiga 600s.
Well, they're quite small. There is like a model that's almost a portable, but it doesn't have a screen.
I would think some of the later models, they probably would combine many chips into a single chip. That would probably get closer to the goal. Sorry. I assume they have modern flash storage solutions for those now, like hard drive emulators, right?
Yeah, compact flash and SD cards can be used on there now and stuff, yeah. It's an interesting area to explore.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when I would have time to get around to it, but that might be worth a crack because I've done so many other systems, but I even built a replica Apple I once, but never the Amiga. I mean, the Amiga is very cool. It'd be worth because it was designed by the same guy who designed my precious Atari 800, Jay Miner.
Yeah, the legend.
Yeah.
How do you prepare for a console hack then?
Well, I like to take it apart, see what's inside. Obviously, things are harder to hack now because you have like 8-layer boards and all this nonsense. I try to pick something that looks like it would be easy to do, doesn't have a lot of power, maybe can be shrunken down. Like as I mentioned, the Atari 2600, all of the circuitry is in a small area in the center with the RF shield around it. And the rest of the board is just holding switches and buttons and stuff. Like nowadays, if they made that, they would never make the circuit board that big because it'd be unnecessarily expensive. But I just, I try to find out whatever pinouts I can find the power rails, figure out what can be removed, what can be moved. And then I hack it up and then do surgery, like a heart bypass, until I can get it working again. And then once I have it as small as I can get it, I draw it into the computer and I drop a cool case around it to figure out what kind of batteries will run it, try to find a screen. That used to be kind of a problem, but now it's actually pretty easy. You can get like LCD screens off Amazon for like $15. And then I design a really cool case so it looks cool and inspires people. I mean, that's what I'm best at, really, is just making it look cool. As you mentioned, like the Amigas in like wooden suitcases and stuff. And I guess it just needs like the magic. But I have like a CNC and a laser cutter and 3D printers and all that stuff. So that makes the that makes the bling really easy.
Yeah, watching the
not
routing's
easy,
always really nice when you're going around.
Yeah, well, I've really gotten a shine to the 3D printers. I started out thinking they were a gimmick, and now I have, you know what? Off the top of my head, I don't even know how many I have. 7, maybe 6 or 7. So, although I like my laser the best, the lasers, I love my laser. We do the show now. Like right now, I spend all my time doing the show and then doing pinball design. So, I don't have as much time to randomly hack old consoles as I used to. Maybe someday, I'll get back into it.
Well, one system you obviously did put the time aside to work on was the Nintendo PlayStation prototype. How did you get approached to do that then?
Okay, so the story behind that was there's a show here in Wisconsin, the state that I live in, called the Midwest Gaming Classic, which coincidentally I named because there was a contest to name it. My name got chosen and I won a free joystick. Yay. But anyway, so I go to it. So it's like the local big show. It's like an hour from here. And it was kind of serendipitous too, because I actually had a TED Talk that weekend. And I was like, oh, crap. I'm going to miss the gaming convention because I have this TED Talk. But then my producer's like, hey, I think we could probably change your flight so you could get back late at night and at least go to part of the show. And I'm like, do it. And she did. Actually, I almost didn't make that flight because the train was late, but I did. So just by the skin of my teeth, I was able to make it to that show. And the guy who had found the system, Terry, and his son Dan, they were showing it at the Midwest Gaming Classic. So it was like the next morning, and of course I got to the show in time to drink all night, of course. So the next morning we woke up and they did a presentation on it, and I was a bit frustrated because they didn't have very much information about it. And so afterwards, we talked to them and like, hey, we have this Ben Heck show. I was wondering if you guys would like to be a special guest so we could like do a teardown on this unit and see what's inside and kind of document it. And we talked to them for a while, and then they agreed to do it, and then they brought it by. I think like last summer, and we did some initial tests. We found some. It hadn't been damaged, but some of the capacitors had failed. So we did that. Then we did a follow-up last fall in Portland at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. And then they loaned it to us again. We actually have it right now. I was working on it earlier today. We have it in the shop, and we're going to have it for a few more weeks. So I'm going to just basically reverse engineer as much of it as I can. And the main goal that I'm trying to do is to get the CD-ROM working. That way it could boot a CD-ROM based game. I mean, you can make a Super Nintendo or Super Famicom game for it and stick it in, and you could probably also simulate the drive using compact flash. Like they have that for the Sega Dreamcast. There's like a SD card simulator for the flash. But I think it'd be cool if I can get the drive working. So right now I'm just trying to get it to play audio CDs, which it tries to do, but there's some error. So that's kind of where I am with my reverse engineering on it.
That must be such an interesting product to get your hands on though and explore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we were cordial enough to Terry and Dan that they trust us enough to loan it to us, because it's basically the rarest video game console in existence. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to tear it apart and solder test points onto it. Because it's inside. It's not like it's magic or anything. It's the configuration. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of wires and capacitors. It's a Super Nintendo with a CD-ROM attached to it. So hardware-wise, it probably wouldn't have been anything special. It would have probably got its clock creamed by the Sega CD-ROM. I mean, the Sega CD-ROM, it's kind of a joke now, but it actually had a good amount of. There was like an extra graphics processor. Yeah. There was an extra audio processor. There was a whole bunch of RAM. There's quite a bit in that, whereas this is, it's basically a CD-ROM attached to the external bus of a Super Nintendo, and the cartridge that you plugged in has something like 256K RAM to load games onto. So, it's more interesting as a historical artifact than a gaming powerhouse. I think obviously there's a lot of different reasons that it had come out, but one of them would have been, I don't think it would have actually been that spectacular. It wouldn't have added really any capabilities to the Super Nintendo. It would have just added mass storage.
Was it kind of interesting looking at the chips as well? Because I guess you'd have to guess, these are Sony ones, these are Nintendo, and it was a big hodgepodge of different things in there.
Well, the Super Nintendo had Sony chips in it for audio as well. It had actually the father of PlayStation designed the chip that is in the Super Nintendo So there's a Sony, basically a Sony coprocessor, and then there's a Sony DSP, because the Super Nintendo has this very distinctive sound because everything on the Super Nintendo is basically sample based. So they load up the 64K of RAM with samples, and then the coprocessor and the DSP take those samples from the audio RAM and play them to create the notes, sound effects, and whatnot for the Super Nintendo. So this system, Sony and Nintendo had already worked together at that point. So this system, it's has all the same chips as a Super Nintendo. It has the same 2 Sony chips, and then the same RAM, the same ROM, the same double PPU that the Super Nintendo does. And then it has basically a few more Sony chips. There's a CD-ROM drive controller, and then another one that is there is one that I don't know what it is. It's not labeled. There's no part number off of it. Every other chip that's on the system is basically off-the-shelf CD-ROM, RAM controller of some kind. Yeah, there is one chip that can't be identified, but the rest of it's, pretty run-of-the-mill. If a person had the time to fully reverse engineer it, there's no reason you couldn't build a CD-ROM add-on that could plug into the bottom of an existing Super Nintendo, because that was going to be a product as well.
Well, that was the only real surprise then, was it, that unidentified chip? There's nothing really else spectacular in there.
Nope, everything else is completely off the shelf. And again, like as I mentioned, if you look at the Sega Genesis CD-ROM add-on, it added a second processor, video, audio. I mean, it was almost like another system. It was another system that was actually more powerful than the Sega Genesis. Whereas this was more or less a large storage attachment.
Well, speaking of Nintendo products that you've worked on recently, I mean, I loved your Virtual Boy mod.
Yes.
You turned it into the Virtual Man. That was awesome. I mean, what inspired you to work on that system then?
Well, VR is kind of in the news. I don't want to say hot because I think it's kind of fad, but everyone's talking about VR and AR and Microsoft HoloLens and all this stuff. So then I was thinking, well, the Virtual Boy was an interesting product. Like, I was actually working at a video game store when that first came out, and I remember, we joked about the headaches, and it was such a flop. It was like $180, then it was on clearance down to $25 at toy stores. Not even a year later, it was just a disaster. But I was like, why doesn't this thing strap to your head? Like, who wants to sit at a table? It's kind of dumb. So we were talking about doing an episode where we try to, hack it and improve it. And then serendipitously, it's the second time I've used that word in this interview. This guy's like, hey, can you fix my Virtual Boy? And I'm like, sure. Want me to mod it as well? So that's how that came about. Yeah, it's interesting. It has these 2 mirrors that oscillate, almost kind of like a galvanometer. And so there's a vertical line of LEDs, and the mirror oscillates to make that vertical line of LEDs scan horizontally to create a full image.
It was pretty clever, though, the design, actually. When I watched your video, I didn't realize it worked like that.
Yeah, it's a neat little system. I mean, I think it had more problems than just being, black and red in color, mostly the portability. But yeah, it was fun. Like, if you think about it, the controller was kind of ahead of its time. It was, kind of some shades of the later GameCube controller. And I don't think anyone I don't think people necessarily want VR now, but they certainly weren't interested in 1995. But, it was a risk. I mean, I would say that's more of a risk than Nintendo takes nowadays. But yeah, it was fun. And then, we also take apart modern things like the Switch. But the Virtual Boy was an interesting footnote in history because, yeah, it was very interesting to see how they did it. There are some things about it that are incredibly janky, like the ribbon cables that provide data to the LEDs that I just mentioned. They're basically glued in place. So what happens is over time they come loose and the Virtual Boys fail. But I actually designed a little 3D printed part that could slip over it. And those files are online. So if people have a Virtual Boy that doesn't work, they could print my clip. Yay.
I was going to say your 3D printer came in very handy in that video, didn't it?
3D printer always comes in very handy. It's one of those things, like, I didn't know that I wanted one, and then once I got one, I was like, how did I live without this?
Well, speaking of Nintendo products that you've worked on as well, I mean, you made the Nes Micro years ago. I mean, long before the Mini that Nintendo came out with.
Yeah, that was using one of those, what do they call them? NES on a chip, NOAC. Like 99% of pirate consoles are just NES on a chip console. And yeah, that was back when they were all put inside of rip-off N64 joystick shells. But I got one, and it was like, 500 games built in, whatever. And I took it apart, and I'm like, oh, well, this has most of those had a Famicom connection on the bottom. But it's fairly trivial just to rewire the Famicom connection to work as a Nintendo connection. So you're able to get those cheap Chinese knockoff game systems, and you got a pretty small Nintendo out of it, like a Nintendo on a chip. There were like half the size of it was just the cartridge connector. And then I remember, what you would do is you would because the main difference between the Nintendo and the Famicom is there's more pins in the Nintendo cartridge, because the pins in the center of the cartridge routed directly to the expansion port on the Nintendo. They were never used, but that's what they added. Whereas the Famicom does not have the expansion port at the bottom. It just has a plug at the back for the disk system. So yeah, you basically just spread the pins out more, if that makes any sense. Like imagine the 60-pin Famicom connector, cut it in half, slide it left and right, and that's basically what the American Nintendo uses.
Have you had any other hacks that have really impressed you, like just seeing them around or on YouTube or anything?
Other people's hacks?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's people, they do some amazing things. I think it was at the same game convention. Someone had showed me a hacked up Wii. And what these people had done, like actually they were like old community members, they had bought many Wiis and like kind of sacrificially destroyed them. So they would take a Wii and they were sanding down the motherboard layer by layer and reverse engineering all of the traces on the multi-layer board. It was insane. And once they had mapped it all out, then they could tell exactly how far they could chop up a Nintendo Wii and it would keep it working. And they had it down to like the GPU, CPU die and then like half an inch around that. So like, I don't know, 1/8 of the original motherboard of the Wii. It was astounding. You could like hold it in your palm. I mean, that was quite amazing.
The system's kill me.
Yeah. And then they had like a SD card simulating the DVD drive. Yeah, it's like I couldn't believe they hacked it that small. That was insane. And yeah, they did it destructively. They basically destroyed a bunch of units to figure out how it worked. Just like Leonardo da Vinci digging up corpses and chopping them up. It's kind of the same thing. I think it's really impressive. As I've mentioned before, anytime I see someone who's like, oh yeah, we wrote an SD card reader, we slapped it onto BBC Acorn and we got it to play full motion video in black and white. Like anytime people do that, it's really impressive. And you see people say, oh, look at what these 8-bit computers can do. Look at the demo scene. It's like, why didn't our games look like that back in the 80s? Well, of course, back then, nobody had the time to make the games look like that. But it's always amazing to see what those systems were technically capable of.
Well, what's the worst console or system design you've seen?
I really don't like the N64. It's so flaky. It's really easy to break. The RAM bus terminators are a pain in the butt. And it kind of sucks, too, because there's a whole generation of young people that just worship that console. And they're always asking me to make portable versions of it. But, oh, my God, it's such a pain in the butt to work with. Like, we're halfway through a build on that now. We need to finish. Like, someone actually started a change.org petition saying that Ben needs to finish his N64 portable. It's like, oh, yeah, that's a major problem in the world. Yeah, I would say, yeah, as far as hacking, the N64 is hands down my least favorite system to work with. It's well designed and it's efficient and small, but there's just so many crazy things about it. Ugh.
Do you feel that hardware is kind of falling short of its accessibility potential? So, for disabled users and stuff like that.
I think it's gotten better a little bit. You start to see PlayStation 4 and Xbox One both now support operating system button remapping. And it's bizarre because like you can look back to the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo games, and a lot of games gave you the ability to remap the buttons. Like, oh, I want this to be jump and I want this to be shoot. And for whatever reason, that kind of went away. Like in the 2000s, customizing controller and remapping just disappeared. It's like, oh, here's your 3 different, Call of Duty stick layouts. Choose one. And it's kind of come back. So now you can actually manually. It kind of sucks that the games aren't doing the remapping. It's the operating system doing the remapping on top of the games. But some of that is coming back. But yeah, one thing with accessibility is that the more buttons and controls they put into these controllers, the harder it is to try to remap those in such a way that someone might be able to get at them. And also, like, we've had that with the ways Sony builds their controllers, just like the physical way they're made. They're basically impossible to hack. Not like, oh, they don't want us to hack it. They just, it's just not done in a way that's easy to modify and solder. That's why on our website we only offer Xbox One. It's not some sort of conspiracy because we like Microsoft. It's that the way they make their controllers really straightforward, signal ground, easy disconnects, solid PCBs. It's just a lot easier to hack. So when we're doing mods for people, that's why we concentrate on that system, because it's the most achievable for us of the next gen consoles.
Well, I imagine, a lot of your kind of portable work that, you've converted into portables, for example, that's been made possible due to improvements in battery technology. I mean, we've got the Switch, which is like, potentially 6 hours of battery. I remember the GameCube and the Atari Lynx, it was like 20 minutes, so...
Well, it wasn't quite that bad, but...
it felt like it.
Well, yeah, I mean, lithium ion and lithium polymer batteries are, they've been around for a long time, but they didn't really start becoming popular really until like the mid to late 90s. Because the big thing was with them is that they had to be made safe. So they were around for many decades, but they weren't really safe until probably, I don't know, late 90s. But I remember when those came on the scene, because I started seeing them in camcorders, and I'm like, wow, these things are amazing. I had this Sony battery for my camera, and it was kind of like almost kind of like a big stick, but you could film all day with that. It was awesome versus the old nickel metal hydride and nickel cadmium batteries that we saw in the past. But then what happens now is like, okay, now we have this really high capacity lithium ion battery, and now let's beef up the power of the system so that it uses up all the, like if you took the battery out of the Nintendo Switch and hooked it up to an equivalent circuit for like the Game Gear. Actually, no, that's not true, because older things like the Lynx and the Game Gear, the systems were weaker, but they're also done with a more primitive process, meaning they were not nearly as power efficient. So that's not necessarily true. Okay, let me put it this way. If you had like a system that was as powerful as Sega Genesis and it was rebuilt with modern technology, then yes, a battery like in the Switch would power it for days. It would be like a smartwatch. But it's like, oh, my garage is filled with junk. I'm going to build a new garage so I have more room. And then your new garage immediately gets filled with junk. Same thing happens with batteries. As much as there is available, it all gets used.
Well, you've had around 33 million views worldwide. How do you feel about entering that kind of special club of YouTubers?
My YouTube channel isn't. I mean, it's cool, but I mean, like the average unboxing channel usually does better than us, or cat videos. I guess it's okay. I mean, I don't necessarily feel like I'm that YouTube famous. Although I will say that, our YouTube channel, we build things, we try to teach things. So I feel that our channel is of more value to people than, like 90% of YouTube channels are basically just bitching about other YouTube channels. So I like the fact that we do more than just drama, and we don't just read a story off of a website and then recite it back into a microphone over footage of us playing a video game, which is also most of YouTube. So I will sanctimoniously say that I am proud of that aspect of our show.
Well, how did you get involved working with Element 14 then?
Their ad agency, or one of the agencies they're working with, actually contacted me about 7 years ago. And they're like, hey, we've got this client that wants to do video content. Would you be interested? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds interesting at the time. And so we had a couple meetings, and then I'm like, oh, it's an electronic distributor. Okay. And then we just did a bunch of meetings, and we came up with an idea for a show. And it's evolved radically over the years. Like the original show is like not even anywhere close to what it is now. But yeah, I was like, hey, I like it. I think it'd be cool if we built things, but I was a big fan of Mythbusters, but I'm like, what if we build things that kind of had a purpose? Like we build something that might help a person with disabilities, or we build a robotic luggage that can follow you around. Like I didn't want to just build things just for the sake of building them, because that's not necessarily satisfying. So that was kind of the original pitch, is that we just kind of build things and then talk about electronics and the electronics community through the building of our projects. And what we're doing right now in our current season is we're working on like 3 longer term builds. We're going to like actually kind of build them right and then see which one turns out the best. And then the best one we'll try to make into a Kickstarter or possibly a retail product.
So what's next then, Ben? Have you got any hacks in progress at the moment that we can look forward to then? What's coming up on the channel?
Well, we're doing some long-term builds. We're trying to make a miniature pinball machine kit so that people could like make their own little game with their kids and program it. We're working on a hot glue gun that kind of works like a 3D printers. You know how they have those 3 doodler pens?
Yeah.
We're kind of trying to do the same thing with hot glue, so you're not like pumping the trigger constantly. It like gives you like a nice constant flow. So we're working on that. Then we're also doing, it's kind of hard to explain. It's like a kind of like a Sudoku logic puzzle game where you're given these scenarios on a screen and you have to put in the patch codes to complete the circuits, like the logic gates, in order to give the right answer. So as we mentioned earlier, kind of teaches people how logic gates works and gives them brain teasers to try to sort it out. So we're doing that on the show. Then I'm also working on a new pinball design, as I mentioned. As far as mods and hacks, right now I don't really have anything in the works, but maybe I'll take a look at an Amiga because I know there's a very dedicated following to that. So that might be fun to do eventually, but it would probably take me a while.
We'd love to see that.
Yeah, and I can send you some pictures of monstrosities as well.
So with those monstrosities inspire me, I can be like, I could do better than that. Right? Okay.
Well,
so pretty much just that.
Well, it's always a good day when a new Ben Heck video lands in my YouTube subscription list. So let's keep up the good work, Ben.
All right. Well, I'm glad you enjoy them.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no problem.